to Professor Nelson number two, civics class. I have here in my hands my pocket United States Constitution and fascinating facts about it. It says, uh, I read this thing way back when as part of my AP government class. I know a thing or two about how the American government works, so we're just gonna talk about it while I wave my hands around, and maybe you'll learn a thing or two. That's all I really care about, teaching people some things. So,
I am very excited.
yeah. So I asked Witch to provide me with a selection of questions that I have up on my screen in front of me right there so that we can talk about things and hopefully demystify some of the weird things going on with the federal government. So, the first question: what is the purpose of separating the legislative and executive branches? So, the purpose of separating these two branches is it separates the people who make the laws from the people who have to enforce the laws. The executive branch is the enforcement arm of the federal government, which means it controls the military, it controls any like nationwide cop organizations per se, which the FBI is, and it ends up enforcing a lot of things that the legislature puts into effect. The legislature gets to write all of the laws, and then the executive gets to go out and do it. One of the problems with this system, though, is that a lot of power that was originally, as described in this little document here, given to the legislature, has sort of been usurped by the executive branch. So the president has slowly like grown in power over time because they keep delegating responsibility to the president because it's just like, we don't want to do it, we don't want to oversee it. Put together some cabinet agency. You go figure it out, Mr. President. And like, usually this is done, like, it's frequently done by a political party when they have like Congress, the lawmaking branch, and the law enforcing branch, and then they lose their elections and it gets passed over to the other side and that gets restructured how they see fit, and it just sort of like perpetuates itself into perpetuity. But it's always interesting to see like, this is where we started, this is where we end. It's amazing how things sort of twist around like that, but the purpose for separating them is so that the people who make the laws don't have to enforce the laws. That's the main point of it. Does that at least make sense?
This makes sense. Uh, from what I understand of like how Canada separates legislative and executive branches, it's different because let me just look something up quick.
Yeah. While you're doing that, I have your second question here. In Canada, the House of Commons is the branch of legislative government that drafts bills, while the Senate is a sober second thought on bills. The Senate is intended to be nonpartisan, although are appointed on recommendation from the Prime Minister. Are these roles similar or different to the House of Representatives and Senate in America? So, the Prime Minister recommends people who are put in the Senate. Do I read that correctly?
Yeah, the Prime Minister recommends people to the Crown, and then the Crown chooses to appoint them. In practice, the Crown will very rarely say no.
Yeah, just sort of like a blank check, or to make sure that you're not doing absolute corruption. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. So,
just a stamp for it.
the in the United States, the House is the place where like budget bills and bills with like big spending have to originate. But if you're just making a law, like if I want to say, uh, we'll make a law to say that boat girls are going to replace the Statue of Liberty. We're going to replace the Statue of Liberty with like, I don't know, the USS Indianapolis from Azure Lane or whatever. That could start in the Senate. That could start in either one. Um, but the way the House and the Senate used to work is a lot closer to how the uh, Canadian system currently works. But instead of the Crown like approving who goes into the Senate, it used to be the states. So what used to happen is if you were a voter in, say, rural Massachusetts way back when the United States of America was founded, what you'd do is you'd vote for whoever's going to your state house, and then you'd vote for the federal legislature. and then whoever won the state race, whoever was in the state house, would choose who their representative would be up to the Senate. So not only did you have to care about like who represented you into the federal government, you had to care who represented you into the state, so that then they could send a guy that you cared about into the federal Congress, into the Senate. That was done away with by an amendment. I forget which one it is. It's something in the 20s, I think. But they removed the direct election, or they added the direct election of senators. And, like, some of the wild cranks I know always talk about how they want to repeal the direct election of senators. And, like, that's something that's never going to happen. But it's fun to think about, you know?
Yeah. What's required to like repeal an amendment?
About the same as it is to pass it. So you need, like, the way amendments are drafted and put together is you can call a constitutional convention, as it's called, and bring in people from every single state, and then everybody can get there, and if they can, like, draft an amendment and pass it there, then it, like, goes forward and can be changed, or like it goes to the next step of the process, or it's like introduced in the House or the Senate, and then it goes out to the rest of the states. And you need to be approved by 3/4 of states that exist. So 38 states need to say, yes, we want to amend the Constitution with this specific thing. That's what it takes to make an amendment to the Constitution. It's a very arduous task, and I think the last one that happened was, like, partially due to a senator, or partially due to the president, like, dying in office, like JFK, and then they realized, oh man, we don't have a way to... Oh, are you kidding me? Does it not have the... Where are the amendments in here? Come on, show me the amendments. Oh no. Okay, here it is. Found it. The last one was ratified in 1967. Or that's the 25th. No, here's the 28th. Congressional salaries proposed in 89, amended in 92. But yeah, like, it takes a long time to get amendments done because it takes, like, years. Like, there's a 10-year window open from, like, when an amendment is proposed and gets put out into the market to when it, like, has to be done by for it to be confirmed. And, like, one of the big causes that people were championing way back when that they wanted to happen was, like, people put together an equal rights amendment. So this has to do with, like, social and racial justice and stuff. Like, in the vague abstract, because I don't remember exactly what it did, like, people talk about, like, repatriations for the Civil War and giving a lot of money to people who were slaves but never really got a fair shake afterwards. And, like, that's the kind of stuff, like, an equal rights amendment is. And, like, you know, that kind of thing. It got approved by a bunch of states but didn't get approved by enough to become a amendment to the Constitution. So, like, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes something that people really agree on as a common sense thing. Like, one of the things in here, like, one of the most recent amendments that happened is the 25th, which was proposed in 1965 and was ratified in 1967. You know what happened in, like, 1965? That's when JFK got shot. So,
Right.
that's what it takes in some cases. And then other ones that came after it is, like, Amendment 26, we're going to let 18-year-olds vote. Amendment 27, we're going to cap, we're going to change how salaries work in the legislature. Where, like, the way it currently works, the way it worked before this amendment came in, you could raise your pay whenever you wanted. You could just do that. But now, you raise your pay, and then you have to face an election, and then your pay goes up. So, like, these are the funny things that make it into the the Constitution of the United States of America. It's great fun, isn't it?
This sounds very. We'll figure it out as we go.
Yeah,
I
because,
hope
like,
that nothing goes really wrong.
well, the foundation of the Constitution also has that built into it because when they were originally drafting it, a lot of compromises had to be made. Like originally, there were sort of two factions that wanted to control how the legislature would work. One of them proposed uh the House, and one of them proposed the Senate. And then Harry Clay from Kentucky or wherever the fuck he's from gets up and says, "We'll do them both. We'll have them both. This is our compromise." And then they got it in. The other thing they did is they had to compromise by making an amendment process because if they there were some people who thought, you know what, this Constitution doesn't protect our rights enough. We are worried about a big, strong central government. We don't want to make one that's too strong. We need a way to change this document. So we are going to propose an amendment process. And, like, imagine Thomas Jefferson or John Adams sitting at the table just being like, yep, fine, we'll do it. We just need a document. And they did it, and then the first 10 amendments were just immediately put up and, like, okayed by everybody and put into practice. They're called the Bill of Rights because, like, immediately after the Constitution was put in, everybody just sort of agreed, like, okay, we want a Bill of Rights. We need more. We need to protect the press. We need to make it so that you can't put soldiers in people's houses. We need to make it, like, really explicit the protections you have when you're in court so that, like, you don't just get dragged in there and thrown out in a kangaroo court. Yeah, like,
Right.
there were some protections, including, like, the 10th Amendment, where they're like, we want to make sure that we don't create a federal branch that just stomps all over the states, so we're going to make sure we get out there and say, states' rights, here in the Constitution, so that anybody can, like, go point back at this and say that it's bad. Because, like, the United States of America, in many ways, I could liken to the European Union. And the way I do that is because each state is roughly equivalent to, like, a country. And then you just get a bunch of states, and you just pile them all together, and, like, the federal government is supposed to sort of oversee that. They originally wanted the states to have a lot more power in this dynamic and not as much to be sent to the government, but now we're, like, 200-something years later, and the federal government is a lot stronger than it was then, so it works.
Right. That makes sense because like one of the big things with independence was no representation in Britain, right?
No taxation without representation. Bang. Pound my fist on the table.
We're gonna dump some tea in the harbor.
Yeah.
Because we're mad.
Because we're mad. We're not happy with this state-sponsored agency that's benefiting from, or, like, that all these products are getting crazy taxed. We have to pay too much for this, even though we're British citizens, and we can't say no to it, so we're going to do the only thing we can do, and we're just going to throw tea in the harbor. And the other fun thing, talking about the Constitution, is they tried to make a federal government before they made the Constitution. They made the Articles of Confederation. And the Articles of Confederation were, in their mind, what they wanted to have initially. But the Articles of Confederation were really weak. They could barely make a currency. They could barely make, like, a standing national army in case we ever got invaded by Britain again. And then they had to be like, this really isn't working. We need something a little bit stronger than this. So, like, the United States Constitution is like a second run at making a federal government in America. It's also, like, the other thing is it didn't come out of nowhere. Like, a lot of the people came from Britain, where the Magna Carta, I think it was, like, proposed by some guy, and they're like, yeah, the Magna Carta seems pretty great. We like these fundamental ideas of, like, democracy and shit. We're gonna make that our federal government. So, the Constitution, like, it came to be over time in iterations, but we've just hit this iteration, and the government hasn't fallen yet, so we're just kind of sticking with it. And some of your other questions down in here are, like, products of their time that still kind of work. It's fine, but it could be a lot worse.
Okay.
I believe some of this is referencing Hamilton, an American musical, which is what informs most of my knowledge of American politics. Yeah. Man.
I am aware that Hamilton is a entertainment production first and foremost, so there are things that are not going to be entirely accurate.
Oh,
This
There
is what I have to go with.
there are some amazing things about Hamilton, like the election of 1800. Like, if you think our elections are bad now, ooh, let's talk about the election of 1800, where, like, it got into the Electoral College, and then they had to choose between Jefferson and John Adams, I think. John Adams, who was the second president, and Thomas Jefferson, who would go on to win and be the next one. But part of the problem that came up is Aaron Burr was in contention for being, like, the vice president or some shit like that, depending upon who won. And, like, Hamilton is sitting there. Hamilton is a federalist. He wants a strong federal government. Thomas Jefferson is an anti-federalist. He wants a weak federal government. He wants, like, power pushed out more to the states. He wants more personal freedom or whatever. And Alexander Hamilton, founder of, like, the dude who organized, like, the National Bank, the nation would not, like, exist as it is without his help, is writing letters like, okay, I know I said Thomas Jefferson is Satan. I know we're calling each other names in the street all the time, but still, fuck Aaron Burr. Fuck him hard, fuck him raw, get him the fuck out of here. You need to support Jefferson so that we don't get stuck with fucking Aaron Burr. And that's a wild thing to think about in this day and age. So, yeah, there are some fun things that you can learn from the Hamilton musical. Other fun things, like, after Aaron Burr shot and killed Alexander Hamilton, he went out west to frontier territories and tried to form, like, a militia group so he could overthrow the United States government so he could be in charge. It's absolutely amazing.
This is wonderful.
Yep. He didn't succeed, by the way, because he recruited a bunch of incompetent idiots, but he damn sure tried.
That's wonderful. The musical ends when Hamilton gets shot because reasons.
Because it's done. Like, it was about his life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next question on our list here. Are there checks and balances on the bodies of government? In Canada, a sitting government can lose power by failing to pass major bills, confidence votes. You can impeach the president for committing crimes, but is there anything for just being bad at the job? The impeachment process is for being bad at the job. And, like, there's a difference between impeaching and there's a difference between removing from office. And, like, I don't need to talk about Trump to talk about that. I need to point back to Bill Clinton or back all the way to Andrew Johnson, where they got impeached, and essentially, like, Andrew Johnson didn't do anything else important going forward, and, like, Bill Clinton got impeached, but, like, nobody removed him from office because, like, he didn't sell state secrets. He just kind of lied about his sex life. So people were like, okay, we've impeached you. We've told you, we've slapped you on the wrist, but we're not going to remove you from office because this is still, like, functional, you know?
So sort of like a don't do this again.
Yeah, don't do this again. Don't fucking intern in the White House and lie to us about it. But the checks and balances in the government depend on what branch of government you are. The legislature gets to check the presidency because any appointments that the president has to make to his cabinet have to get passed by the legislature. And then they also get to check the president because they get to make the rules. The president gets to check the legislature by, like, he chooses how the rules are enforced, and he has, like, some budget setting power that he can send to them. And that's his way of sort of fighting back. And then you've got the Supreme Court up here. The Supreme Court, all of its justices have to be confirmed by the legislature, but the Supreme Court gets to, like, make rulings on whatever the legislature says, and that's how they sort of check each other. And then the president, I gotta make sure my hands are on screen and, like, all the locations are the same here. The president gets to check the Supreme Court because he gets to choose who's on the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court gets to check the president because they also get to look over his executive orders. Like, in all of them, the Supreme Court is probably the most powerful just because it's, like, the hardest to check against. and they're elected for they're chosen essentially for life. They just get to hang out there forever. Like, we just have 9 people who just get to hang out and decide whether our laws are good or bad for however long they want to sit there, because that's the Supreme Court. Woo!
Okay, so, like ostensibly life appointments are so they don't have to be beholden to the whoever's in power.
Yeah, it's so they're beholden to the rule of law and what's good for the nation, as opposed to what's expedient for whatever political faction is there. Well, the interesting things is that people have been talking about, like, Democrats have been talking after Trump got a third Supreme Court nominee onto the Supreme Court. They're talking about packing the courts now because they're like, this is too much. We don't like this. We think that the branch is going to stay holding a viewpoint favorable to Republicans for too long. We need to pack the court so that our views are heard. So this was tried back with FDR, where he wasn't happy that the Supreme Court was telling him, no, don't make your alphabet agencies and seize all this power in the middle of a depression. That's bad. That's un-American. Don't do that. And he's like, I'm going to increase the size of the Supreme Court to 15 justices if you don't stop doing this. And then they stopped doing it. So, I mean,
so he can just choose to have more justices?
Oh yeah, we can have more than 9 anytime. We can have more anytime. Like, if Trump felt like it, he could appoint like 3 more Supreme Court nominees before he left office if he felt like it. Cocaine Mitch might be able to get them on the court, but it's probably a bad idea to do that for the reasons of, like, a lot of Democrats lost their down ballot elections, and the size of their majority in the House of Representatives has drastically shrunk, partially because Republican messaging on court packing and Biden and Kamala Harris not giving a solid answer no to that. The Republicans were able to convince a lot of people that they're going to pack the court, and people responded to that by saying, we are sending a Republican instead of a Democrat because a Republican will pack the court for their own partisan ideas, which is a strange thing to come out and say, but that was a winning, air quotes here, a winning argument that the Supreme Court will not change and be expanded under us. The Democrats will do that, but not us. So,
okay,
we'll see what happens. Court packing is very contentious, and a lot of Democrats are complaining because of the opportunities that Trump has had to put people on the Supreme Court that they don't like. And their frustrations are coming out in, we're going to pack the court, which is a very extreme stance, and I'm not sure where they're going from there, because in this last election, they've sort of been told, no, don't do that by the voters. Sorta. But that's one of the checks that a president can put on the Supreme Court. He can just appoint guys to the... He can put up appointments that are more closely tied to his ideas, his viewpoint, and presumably the viewpoint of his party. Yeah. What's next? Is there regional representation in the House of Representatives and Senate, or is representation more on a state level? In Canada, each electoral district elects one member of parliament for the House, but that does not seem like it would work with an electoral college system. So, what is an electoral district in Canada? Do they cross provincial lines, or is it subdivided within a province?
Subdivided within a province.
Okay.
Generally, the major cities will have like 4 or 5, maybe more electoral districts.
Okay. Does each province have like a provincial level government, and then it sends people to a federal level government, a nationwide?
The provincial governments and the federal governments are separate elections and everything.
Okay. That's sort of analogous to state and our federal government. So what happens in the US is that you elect senators and you elect House of Representative members. Each state gets 2 Senate members. Each state gets House members apportioned by their percentage of population. So we have... The reason why it's 538.com is there are 538 total people who are in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and like there are 3 votes counted from the District of Columbia, even though they don't get like voting power or whatever. Like the Senate is 100. It's a little strange, but so each state has representatives apportioned by population, and each state has senators apportioned by being a state. So the tug of war between the Senate and the House is one of geography. The House is based a lot on its population. So a lot of states like, say, California and New York, like California has, I think, 53 representatives in the House, whereas in the Senate they only have 2. So California gets a much larger representation in the House than, say, Minnesota, where we only have 8 here. But in the Senate, Minnesota has 2 senators, California has 2 senators. So the Senate is sort of that counterbalancing factor of, we are a group of many different little countries, and this is how every country has its representation, versus the House, where this is how the people have their representation, per se. So there's sort of a divided idea of like, this is where the people kind of get their voice, here's where the states themselves as political bodies get their voice.
Okay.
Which a lot of Democrats aren't happy with at the moment, because a lot of states are controlled more by Republicans than Democrats. So the Senate is heavily stacked in the favor of Republicans just because of that fact. Like, they can run up vote totals as much as they want in cities like New York or San Francisco, where it's like 90% Democrat to 10% Republican, but that doesn't change the Senate, where places like Wyoming, the least populous state in the nation, get 2 electors to the Senate because they do. So it's that tug of war between the popular vote and the interests of the state in quotation marks here, because there's state as a big political body and state as like a state, actually. So
right,
yeah, I don't know how it's quite done in Canada. Maybe we can have like a review of that as we sort of get through the end of your questions here, where you can sort of be like, this is how it is instead.
I think the analogous, like the way it would be analogous would be if each county elects one person that they send to Congress. But I'm not entirely sure how that would work.
Well, the way it works in America is we have districts. Like Minnesota is carved up into 8 districts for the House. Like 2 of them essentially, like one is essentially Minneapolis, one is essentially St. Paul, and then we have one that's like the northeast corner. We have one that's just the entire western border of the state. Like the House of Representatives is regional for the state it comes from, you know? So like it's sort of like a county sending somebody up, but at the same time those lines get redrawn every 10 years whenever the census comes in, and then it's time for redistricting and gerrymandering, as it's known, because of a guy named Jerry who drew this weird district so he could have more power, and people looked at it and they're like, man, that's fucked up. Good job, Jerry.
Let's do it anyways.
He had the power. He could draw the district that way. And one of the things that's like, and the fun thing is, you know how those districts are drawn? Every state chooses how it wants to draw those districts to send people up to the federal level.
Okay.
So, like, if you are, say, in a state that's been controlled by one political party for hundreds of years, I don't know, you probably want the laws to be set up so that you can, like, maintain that power and gerrymander with whatever you want, so that you can continue to maintain that power through good times and through bad times. So some of the states, like there's a dude who's kind of a hot button dude in the American House of Representatives named Dan Crenshaw. He's from Texas. He's from like this crazy gerrymander district where it looks like a sea or something like that. And, like, he could just have a regular square-ass looking district, but no, he has this gerrymandered district in the middle of nowhere so that it produces a representative of his political party. And, like, he gets out there, says hot button things, and he's like, man, that's just how the map's drawn. That's just how it works. And he's right. Like, the other crazy thing is, like, in Minnesota here, we have a completely different system where if our House of Representatives and our Senate, our state House and our state Senate, can agree on what the map is going to look like, they can do that. They can just do that. So if, say, Minnesota has voted Democrat in every presidential election since Nixon, like it's 40 plus years of a voting Democrat. So if, say, the Democrats had the House and the Democrats had a Senate, they could redraw the borders so that our current setup of, like, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats could be redrawn to, like, 5 Democrats, 3 Republicans. And they could just do that because they have the House and they have the Senate. They could just do that. But the way Minnesota's currently set up is if they don't agree, so say the current situation is the House is controlled by Democrats, the Senate is controlled by Republicans, they don't agree, it goes to a group of nonpartisan judges, and they're just going to be like, well, we're going to draw fair districts. We're just going to do this because it's important to us. So, like, Minnesota gets like, this state could be so much heavier in either direction if either political party actually controlled it for longer just because of the fact of how redistricting and how our dumb laws look. Like, we could look like Texas with that weird C-shaped district, but we don't because judges draw our borders instead of political parties. So that's one of the things I'm sort of thankful for, Like,
yeah.
Like, an election every 10 years is more important than an election in any other time because we're going to redraw all of our electoral borders, and whew, that is absolutely whack. So yeah, things are fun.
Things sound very fun.
Things are really fun. It's great. It's perfect. I love it here. Speaking of things, why is the Electoral College? Most of the media I consume seems to be critical of it, but there must be some reason for using it. Are there historical justifications for it that don't hold true in modern times? So, originally speaking, the Electoral College would meet and it would decide who the president was going to be. And the Electoral College was whoever got elected to the House of Representatives and whoever got elected to the Senate. So, the problem with polling way back in 1790 or 1800 is that you have this massive space that you have to get votes out to for people, and then you have to bring them all in up to the federal level. And that's really hard to do. But doing it for the state level, that's a lot easier to do. So what they did is they just sort of left it to the state to choose who was going to choose the president. And they thought, this makes a lot of sense. The people who are elected by the people are going to check the president by choosing who is going to be the guy that's going to enforce the laws that they're going to put in the books. That's another check from the legislature to the president because they don't want a powerful guy that's going to be doing whatever the hell he wants because he's king. And then they went ahead and they could have made George Washington king forever if he didn't say, no, you're about to make me king forever. I'm done after 2 terms. But the Electoral College was a product of its time to, what's the word I'm looking for here? To make sure that the president was held in check and not too powerful over everything else. And then time moved on, technology improved, and what was basically happening around the time of the Civil War is you'd have presidential candidates traveling around the nation, stumping for their party in whatever location they were at as they're riding around on the trains, and, they'd get their party into office, and then their party would choose the president. But as we've gotten more into modern times, like with the airplane and the automobile and stuff, it's now feasible to vote for the president on, a nationwide scale. So the Electoral College has sort of changed its intent, where any state can choose how it selects its electors to the Electoral College. And one of the funny examples is Nebraska, where it apportions its vote in the Electoral College based on the percentages that are given in its state to whatever presidential candidate. So frequently what'll happen is they'll send like 9 guys to vote for whoever the Republican is, and 1 guy to go vote for whoever the Democrat is, because the Democrat got enough votes to peel one off for whoever they're going to vote for. So the Electoral College, the electors are selected by the state still, so there's still a level of like statewide control to whatever the federal government's doing. But essentially what happens now, the Electoral College is just a weird way of tabulating a popular vote for who's going to be president. So what it basically comes down to is it's sort of like, it's a hybridization of what I talked about earlier, of the state interests in the Senate and the population interests of the House colliding with each other to choose who's going to be the big damn guy that's going to enforce all the laws in America. So it's that compromise again of population versus state interests. And it works. It usually works, and it usually works fine. But the problem is, like, people complain about the Electoral College, especially because somebody who wins the popular vote might not necessarily become the president. It happened to George H.W. Bush. Wait, no, H.W. Bush is the older one. It happened to George W. Bush in 2000. It happened to Trump in 2016. And, like, it means that people aren't happy when, you know, they got more votes for their guy, but somebody else won because of the arcane rules of the election. To which, like, the winners are always going to say, the rules are right there. Those are the rules. Play by them. Like, we've done this for 200 years. You know what the rules are. Go out and win. It's just, it's a little hard to stomach in those cases. But one of the fun things I want to point out is very few presidents win without carrying their home state. The reason why Gore lost in 2000 is not because Bush won Florida, where it was decided by the Supreme Court, where they had to come in and intervene in the election in Florida to decide it for Bush. No. He lost that election because he couldn't carry his home state of Tennessee. Like, if he carried his home state, we don't have to talk about Florida ever again. He couldn't carry his home state, the place that he came from. He wasn't able to convince the people who know him best to vote for him for president of the United States. That's why Gore did not win in 2000.
That's a pretty bad look.
Yeah, it's a pretty bad look. And, like, it gets weird when you try to apply that to modern elections, like 2016, because where does Trump come from? He comes from New York. Okay, where does Hillary Clinton come from? She comes from New York. Okay,
they both can't win New York.
They both can't win New York, and that's a state that's heavily favored for the political party that is not Trump's. So there was probably no way he was going to carry his home state anyway. But it's just one of the weird outliers to the rule of you carry your home state when you win the presidency. Like, in 1984, where Ronald Reagan swept the nation and won with 225 electoral votes to the 13 electoral votes that Walter Mondale got. Walter Mondale carried the District of Columbia, where the federal government resides, and he carried Minnesota, his home state. That's it. He won his home state. That's the only state he won. Even
because District of Columbia isn't a state.
It's not a state. Like, the people who made the Constitution were adamant that the District of Columbia should not be a state and should not have representation, because it is the federal government deciding what the interests of the federal government should be, when all of that power should come from the states who are choosing to give power to the federal government. So the framers of the Constitution absolutely did not want the people who lived and worked in the federal government to choose the policy positions of the federal government and have representation there, which, like, in a way, it made sense at the time. They really wanted, and didn't get, because it's absolutely unfeasible. they didn't want a they didn't want people to be involved in the federal government full time. They wanted it to be like kind of weak. They wanted people back home in their home states. They wanted like little power to be invested in the seat of government because like that way you build up like the weird courts that hung out around kings or sultans or everywhere else in the world. They didn't want that sort of influence to build up. Excuse me. And then it did anyway. They tried. They failed. But they tried. So,
Okay.
like, the Constitution, at its fundamental core, is like a bunch of ideas for what they wanted to do. It's a hope for a world that does not exist and can't exist because of the failures of the heart of man. Like, they wanted originally, like, part of the reason things are so convoluted and why there's this electoral college nonsense, they didn't want political parties to come back. Like, they'd seen political parties in all the places they came from, and they're like, people care more about the party than they do about, like, doing what's right for the people. We don't want to have political parties, per se. Like, when George Washington was elected president, he was not of any political party. That's true for when he was first elected and true when he was reelected. But everyone else around the time started to form themselves into political parties that have slowly morphed in over time into the Republican Party we have and the Democratic Party we have. So, like, they wanted something good. They wanted an ideal that we as people cannot live up to. But it's just kind of life, you know? They wanted us not to be mired in the partisan left-right spectrum. But we're stuck there because we're dumb and this is our life. Next question. Hello, Shield of Iron. We're talking civics. Do you like civics? I like civics. I like civics a lot. I'm answering Witch's questions about how the American government works before we host over to Jason once he finally goes live. So, Witch's next question. I've heard it said that America is not a democracy, it is a republic. What does that mean in simple terms, as they more or less seem to be the same concept to my smooth brain, in that they are both governments that are elected by the people? So, in a democracy, like a true democracy, every single change of law is put before the people. That's not what we get in America at all. Like, Canada also is a republic because you vote for the people who are going to write and draft the laws for you, and then they go and do that. That is what a republic does. A republic chooses who is going to govern everybody else, and then it invests them with the power necessary to write the laws and do so, as opposed to a democracy where it has to get together to choose its own rules. Democracy works really well in small groups, like a settlement of 10 or 20 people, or maybe if you get larger, up to maybe 100 or so. But once you get to millions of people, imagine if you got a ballot in the mailbox every week, every month, even every year, that's like 50 pages long, asking for your decision on inputs, like 500 things you need to decide on. Like, democracy in a very large area could very quickly become not good. Oh, Witch's internet has died because the router got unplugged. Oh no. Well, I will continue explaining democracy versus republic. A republic is a simplified democracy per se. Like, it carries forward some of the ideas of democracy where you can, like, replace whoever's making the laws for you over time, but you don't have to deal with the fact that you have to vote for every single change in the law as it comes down the pipe going forward. True democracy on very large scales is very hard to make work for the amount of time that will go into making sure that any decision is the correct one, and it will make it very difficult to make decisions quickly. So, the purpose of the Republic is to... I'll see when he's back in. He's back in. All right. The purpose of a republic is a compromise on democracy to make it workable with large scales of people. In a democracy, you get to vote on every little decision that's being made, In a republic, you choose the people who are going to make the decisions. If they make the wrong decisions, you kick them out. That's the basic difference between a republic and a democracy. Does that make sense?
This makes sense.
Cool. Great. Canada is also a republic. Like, republics work really well for being closer to the people, having a mandate from the people, but also not, like, being mired in entirely spending time getting opinions from the people. So there's that. That's pretty great. We're coming up on the time when Jason would normally start streaming, so I'm going to go to the last question on here. You've told me in the past that the Speaker of the House is very much not an impartial role. Is there a different impartial role that maintains decorum and order in the House? It would seem to me that could run into a situation of rules for thee, not for me, especially with how polarized American politics appears to be. So, there's nobody that's elected to government that is nonpartisan. If you face an election, you are partisan, unless you're a judge, I suppose. But a judge also, like, is a special case because they have to administer rule of law, and you absolutely do not want somebody administering rule of law to be partisan. So, if you're in the House of Representatives, you have campaigned as part of a political party and made it into there as part of a political party. The Speaker of the House is chosen from whichever political party gets the most seats in the House, and then they get to choose who gets to be the Speaker of the House that gets to do things like, these are the bills that are going to be heard by the full body, here's where people are going to be on committees, here is what the rules are going to be for the House. Like, the rules change a little bit over time, but the rules always talk about how the body as a whole will act and not how individual members or individual component parties will work within that body, you know? So it's a level playing field once you are in the House, regardless of whether you are Republican or Democrat or independent in some cases, because people from Vermont can run and win independent. But yeah, like, American politics is extremely polarized because of this division between the two political parties. And that's just kind of how it's been for a very long time and how it's going to be into the future. Like, in some ways, the two-party system is more stable than what you'll get in, like, Britain or Canada or something, where they have many viable, I'm putting it in quotation marks because, like, I watched the UK elections in 2016 where Boris Johnson got elected, and I'm not sure I would describe some of those political parties that were running candidates as viable, you know?
Okay.
A lot of the parties overseas are based on, like, single issues and single causes. So you end up with a very narrow focus, and once it comes time to unite all those narrow focuses into a government, you start to have problems. Meanwhile, in the US, you have two parties, and your issues are usually split into, here is one political party, here is the other political party. And generally speaking, the two political parties tend to follow, like, people's usual thoughts on issues in the whole. I say usually as a big summation there, because a lot of the interests align between the messages put together by the party, you know? Like, the people who are maybe in unions or rely on a union to secure their next paycheck are also maybe the people who have been trampled by big oligarchs, per se, and they'll vote for other, like, social causes or stuff, or welfare reform that'll put more money out to people who are poor, etc., etc., etc. There's a way where you can talk about why the platform is set up the way it is and how all the ideas interlock and work together and work. There's a lot of people who don't necessarily fall into that two-party split. That's why you have stuff like the Libertarian Party, where they still want the fiscal stuff they do of the Republican Party, but they want to take a less involved approach on social issues, like, well, I want to say like the Democrats do, but Democrats are not uninvolved in social issues. They're pushing a more, I'm going to say, liberal agenda in the small L, not the big L, because you frequently say, oh, they're a liberal, and that means they're going to vote Democrat. Like, in a more... I'm going to use the word tolerant because I can't think of a better word, but a more tolerant social outlook compared to, say, a Republican view would be otherwise. So, like, there are people that don't necessarily fall into the left-right spectrum, but the party dynamic between the two parties tends to dominate everything, per se. And what ends up happening is they solve things by writing rules for the House or the Senate that will sort of benefit the party in the abstract, but every senator, like, it doesn't matter whether you drive off a bridge and kill a woman in your passenger seat, you're probably going to face the same consequences regardless of whether you have a D next to your name or an R next to your name. I say that because I'm talking about a very specific senator, Ted Kennedy, who got away with driving drunk and killing a woman in his passenger seat when he drove off a bridge because he was friends with the right people. Nice. Good job. So, like, when people... That's one of the things that Republicans will point to when Democrats start talking about the Republicans not being paragons of virtue or whatever, or they'll talk about Trump tweets and grab them by the whatever. They'll just point back to be like, yo, this guy that you care about that was a Democratic senator forever, he killed a woman and got away with it, and you kept electing him, so, woo! And that's one of the things about, like, one of the problems of partisan politics is you always have an example where you can point to that, because parties will rally around some of their bad influences because it means they get to keep and maintain power by keeping them in place. And that's one of the reasons the framers absolutely hated parties, but they got them anyway because we suck. Are there any other questions that you have, Witch?
I think that about covers my questions.
Yeah. One of the other things that obviously makes it a little harder to get an impartial view on American politics is who you get your information about American politics from. And one of the ways where people, I think, overseas might not be well served by the American media is when you look at where money donated to political campaigns went in the 2016 election. Like, if you look at media journalists from, like, CNN and stuff, 90% of the money donated from people who work at those organizations went to Hillary Clinton instead of Trump. So, like, you look at that number, and you extrapolate back to the people who are providing you with news, and then it sort of, like, shapes how you sort of trust those media organizations, per se. Like, even though they claim to be impartial, they have a viewpoint that they're sort of pushing out onto the world, and, like, the only network that really is a major network that lets it hang out in the air where they're willing to sort of let you know what side they're on is Fox News. That's basically it. And that's because primarily, like, they maintain their popularity because they are, on top of a news source, also an opinion source. And one of the other amazing things to look at that I remember is, like, people from Harvard sat down and did a study where they were like, we're going to put these metrics in place. This is how we judge negative coverage of something. This is how we judge positive coverage of something. We're going to look at all the major news outlets, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, etc., etc. We're going to see how people talk about the presidential election. And the absolutely amazing thing to me, Fox News came in fair and balanced, 50-50 positive, negative coverage of President Trump. Everything else was way further over in the negative side. So, like, media bias also causes problems, especially with people overseas who have no idea any of the context of the American government and why it's been set up the way it is, because they need to learn why their government has been set up the way it is instead of worrying about our government. But the problem is, the thing that the United States is really good at is exporting its culture, is exporting any of our little problems that we argue about. it all gets exported out into the wider world. So people care about our issues and what's happening here, even though it barely affects their daily lives. So
I'm eating a salad.
good for you. So just
Really?
like
Right in front of my salad?
so like Jason's about ready to stream here. I'm willing to close this off with like the heat has been
No, I'm
turned
eating a
up
salad.
in politics because it makes money to turn the heat up in politics. So when you see a headline that's shouting a lot about a particular thing, like stop and take a second. It's probably not as bad as somebody is trying to convince you it is, because they have a stake in convincing you it's as bad as it is. And sometimes it takes a little context from somebody who has to like sit there and live and care about this. Like Witch doesn't know a lot about how the American government works because he doesn't have to know. This has been to sort of explain to him and explain to other people. This is sort of how it works. This is why it works the way it does. These are the historical constraints that decided the way that it works. So, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. A quick history lesson on questions to make Witch understand America better. I hope y'all have a nice night. Jason, how much more time do I have to buy before you're ready to stream so I can just host on over to you?
I have a mouthful of salad. Hang on.
Well, that's exactly what I'm going to do as soon as the stream is done.
Me too.
Here's the
Me
thing.
too.
I haven't had a salad in about 6 months.
Yeah.
This is fucking
Wow.
delicious. This is fucking delicious.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna rave about it on my stream here in a hot second.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Now listen, I've been feeling like garbage because I've been eating like garbage, and I just literally had the best mushrooms I've ever put in my fucking mouth, and I need to tell the entire planet. So,
You need to squat more frequently.
I did squats today. I did squats on Sunday.
Yeah.
Anyway, where's the button? Okay,
The button. Press the button, Jason. Press the button.
I got freaking thing. Bandwidth
I believe in you.
test, turn that off. And apply. Start streaming. Okay, we're live.
Hell yeah! Time to press the
Yay!
raid message. /raid Shadow Legends.
Oh geez, now it's
Were
telling
you-
me the code is overloaded. Okay, we good now? It was
One viewer is
fine when I
ready to raid
touched
Bad
it.
Gunpla. Perfect. That's exactly what I expected. 2 viewers are ready to raid Bad Gunpla. Good. Have a
Yeah.
nice night, everybody.
Let's go.
Bye.
Raid message is message deleted.